fantastic people that we want to hear from today. So I am going to welcome my co-host, Canon Missioner Leonard Hamlin, do a little bit of intro here. And there, Canon Hamlin, welcome. So excited to be hosting with you tonight. So here's the scoop, y'all. Formally and on behalf of Dean Hollerith and Canon Hamlin and myself as co-hosts for this event tonight, we are grateful that you're here. We are also grateful to our guests who are here tonight to have some conversation with us. You'll hear more about them from Canon Hamlin in just a moment. But first, I just want to bring to the forefront the Cathedral's role as a convener. One of our priorities is to bring people together for important conversations in our society, in our religious communities. And our hope is that what that means is that we're convening people who don't all think alike, that we're convening people who can listen to one another, can learn some things from one another. And that means we hope we have some really honest conversation. And it also means that we hope that everyone who is here, and I'm including myself in this, those of you who know me know I have a lot of opinions, know that what I'm hopeful for is that the folks who are on the panel and with us on the screen, and also those who are watching on Facebook or listening in Zoom, get a chance to really absorb some things that we might not have heard before, that we get a chance to listen and connect toward the purpose of moving toward a just society, which is the title of this event, which is where we hope to go, right? And we're gonna ask our panelists a little bit about that in a moment. So again, Michelle Dibblee, Program Director here at Washington National Cathedral, and I'm gonna turn it over to my co-host, the Reverend Canon, Leonard Hamlin, our Canon Missioner, to get us started.
Well, good evening, and I'm grateful this evening to join with Michelle Dibblee, our Programs Director, and on behalf of course, of our Bishop as well as our Dean, we'd like to welcome everybody this evening. And for those that are inclined to join me in a word of prayer as we begin all of our webinars and moments of conversation, I invite you to join me as we open up this evening. Almighty, we come so grateful for this evening and the opportunity that you have set before us. We thank you for the discussions that will take place and ask now that they would be challenging our thoughts, stirring up our spirit, that we might be the instruments of building that beloved community in just such a time like this. We are so ever grateful for your grace, grateful for the opportunity to reason one with another and to work together on building a better day, not just in this moment, but more foundation for tomorrow. So we ask now for those who have come from all four corners, that they would be drawn together, not just in this conversation, but in the work of building a just society and beloved community. So we thank you for this on this wonderful evening. This is our prayer. We ask in your name. Amen. Amen. Let me say is that I'm grateful this evening to be able to join with our Programs Director and to have the opportunity to present the panelists who have graciously said yes to being part of this discussion on tonight. And what a wonderful opportunity that we have and panelists who are joining with us. I want to begin by first welcoming our Patrol Chief, Chief Lamar Green, welcoming him this evening, who is Chief or the Patrol Chief for the Metropolitan Police Department here in Washington, D.C. And as he has served in this capacity, it includes the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th police districts. Police Chief Greene offers more than 2 decades of law enforcement experience and expertise. And he started his career as an officer here in the district, in the 5th district, as a patrol sergeant in the 3rd district, and then was promoted to patrol lieutenant in the 5th district. He was appointed as an inspector, assigned to the 1st district. He has also provided protection for the mayor of the District of Columbia and and family. He has served in numerous capacities, receiving different awards throughout his career. He has been an assistant chief of police for the police department, managing Homeland Security, and of course, as well as other executive command positions. And so we're grateful this evening to welcome him, bringing that breadth of experience. We're thankful as well on this evening that we might be able to welcome and grateful to have around the table Reverend Delonte Gholston. He was born as well and raised in Washington, D.C., and was educated in the D.C. public schools. Attended Swarthmore College, Georgetown University, Fuller Theological Seminary, and returns to his hometown after 7 years of being away to pastor Peace Fellowship Church here in Washington, D.C. And as he was raised National Baptist, he's now, of course, a teacher, preacher, musician, but he has this passion for advocacy and development that has always been deeply rooted in his faith. And so it has led him to serve in church renewal and planting movements in DC as well as Louisiana. And he is committed to using his passion for art, theology, and social change to bring life and flourishing both to cities and to rural areas. And so we're grateful that he is with us on this evening. We certainly are thankful for his presence, as he has also just become a new father once again. So we're grateful to be able to welcome you on this evening and that you could be able to spend this time with us. And then we're excited once again and grateful to have the Reverend Dr. Gayle Fisher-Stewart. She was ordained in 2015 and currently serves as the interim rector of St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. A native Washingtonian, prior to accepting the call to ordain ministry, she has retired from the Metropolitan Police Department as a captain and then taught at the university level. She is the president of the Washington, D.C. chapter of the Union of Black Episcopalians, and also serves as the chaplain for the Tacoma Park Police Department, providing spiritual aid and assistance to the department personnel, regardless of their belief. She is a graduate of the University of Maryland, University College, University of Maryland, with again with her master's and PhD, American University with another master's there, at University of District of Columbia with another master's there. Dr. Stewart, it just goes on, and but we're grateful for what you bring to the table. As she is joining us on this evening, she is also an author, and her recently published book, Preaching Black Lives Matter, asks and answers the question, what would the church look like if Black lives mattered? And so it is in response to the uprisings over the police murder of Mr. George Floyd, and she has developed the curriculum to serve and protect, bridging the gap between the police and the Black community. Well, we're grateful this evening to welcome our panelists and grateful that you have said yes to joining us. This is going to be a wonderful evening of conversation. Let me say, as I prepare to throw out this first question, again, Michelle Dibblee and I have been looking forward to this evening and anticipating a rich and helpful conversation, gathering your perspectives. I'd like to begin with the question, a question to put before you. We're all familiar, perhaps many speaking about injustice. And that is something that perhaps has dominated the conversations, or persons immediately jump into and they point to the injustices. But from your perspectives, what we'd like to begin, because we all know we're working together for a just society, I'd like to begin by asking the three of you to respond to, from your perspectives and through your work, what does a just society look like and mean to you? That as you're carrying out your work as a police officer, certainly as pastors, theologians, community members, what does a just society mean when you hear that? And certainly, I'm going to ask Reverend Gholston, if you'd like to lead us off, could you lead us off?
I want to say thank you again to everybody for the invitation, certainly to the National Cathedral, to all the panelists. It's good to be together, to everybody, all 185 of you from all over the country, all over the world. It's a blessing to be able to be together. For me as a Christian pastor, the definition of what a just world or a just society is really found in what Jesus says in Luke 4, when he says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. Jesus says that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to set the captives free, to bind the brokenhearted, to declare the year of the Lord's favor, to give sight to the blind. In that declaration or that proclamation of why Jesus is saying that he came, Jesus is saying that a just society looks like a free society, a society in which people who are oppressed are set free, people who are blind. Blindness, of course, is the most commonly healed disease or ailment that Jesus comes to heal. And Jesus is on a mission to set people free. And so a just society is a free society, a society in which everybody has what they need. He declares at the end of that phrase that he's declaring the year of the Lord's favor, making a clear reference to this season of Jubilee, where people who are enslaved are set free, where the land, creation is given time to rest, where anything that is not right be set right. And so the kingdom of God, the reign of God in the earth is about everybody having what they need. It's about communities who might have been historically at the margins being placed in the center of God's heart and God's love. It's about more than enough. It's about a world in which we're not living or operating based upon ideas of scarcity or of lack, or of greed, or of hoarding. Say amen to your auntie and to your grandmother who still has all the hand sanitizer from CVS and from and from Costco. That the kingdom of God is a kingdom in which we have more than enough. And so Jesus articulates that very clearly in Luke 4. Jesus also comes back around to it in John 10, where Jesus says that he came that we might have life and have it to the full, have it abundantly. And so that's really the world that God intends for us. It's a world in which we're not competing with each other for resources. It's a world in which people who, especially in this country, Black folks and Native American folks and Indigenous folks, we need to acknowledge that we're on their land, Potomac land, Anacostan land. That everybody is somebody in the kingdom of God, and that's really what a just world looks like. It's a place in which there is no lack, there is no scarcity. Everybody has more than enough. Everybody has what they need.
Dr. Stewart?
It is good to be here, and I have to say, Reverend Delonte, amen, 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 and ditto. But for me, I mean, most of us pray, most of us Christians pray a prayer, the Lord's Prayer, which says, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, that you shouldn't have to die. You should not have to die to have what God intends for us to have, that everybody has, as Delonte says, have what we need to thrive, that all obstacles to that thriving are eliminated. And we talk about this country being the richest country on the planet. I mean, there is enough. God has provided enough for everybody, but it's hoarded. We like to keep it all to ourselves. And then we have all these things that separate people. We have race and sexism and homophobia and all these things that kind of put people in categories and say that you can't have because of this. And so a just society is a society where people have what they need to thrive. And that thriving comes from God. And that maybe as I'm getting older, because I realize I've been in this fight for almost half a century. Yeah, so it's about time something changes. That you shouldn't have to die to have what God has promised. That everything is here, but that people are just too selfish and self-centered to share what isn't theirs in the first place. And so we have to get to a point where we acknowledge that and work toward heaven on earth. And I believe we can have heaven on earth. And so again, thanks for this opportunity. And maybe with this conversation, we can get beyond the dialogue and get to some action.
Chief Lamar, this may not be a question that always gets asked, but that's why I'm bringing you into the conversation with all the work that is taking place. Could you respond to that as well?
Yes, sir. First of all, I would like to say good evening to everybody and everybody watching this forum. Thank you for having the Metropolitan Police Department here in Washington, D.C. as a participant on this forum, especially on the heels of everything that has occurred lately, the tragic death of George Floyd, the murder, and all of the other ones that have occurred at the hands of police officers throughout the nation over the years as we have watched. The path to a just society, in my opinion, means a society, and this is my opinion, void of racism, void of inequality, where every man, woman, child is not only seen as equal, but they're actually treated as equal in every aspect of that society, to include law enforcement. As a Christian man, born and raised here in Washington, D.C., it's important to me that we treat one another with respect and dignity in all facets of life. I think that would cure a lot of the ills that we see in our world today. But specifically from a police perspective, it's paramount that we treat people with respect and that our interactions are dignified. We treat people with dignity. What we've been seeing across our nation is the absence, in my opinion, of dignity and respect when it comes to law enforcement involvement in our communities. We must address that, conquer that implicit bias, and utilize a bias-free policing model where we don't prejudge individuals for any reason when we make contact with them. A police department's values are the foundation of their operations. On our department, we train our officers to be fair, to be constitutional, to be unbiased policing, to use unbiased policing in their public interactions. That's a high standard. We don't always meet it, but all departments throughout our nation should be pushing for that level of commitment. I think it goes further than just the ground floor in the policing community. And the ground floor, in my opinion, is where you see your officers that are out on the street, patrolling your streets. It's also the system that the officer and agency belong to. It's equally important for that justice system to operate in a fair, impartial manner where politics, race, origin, and economic status don't play a role in prosecutions, and they don't play a role in the absence of prosecutions. I think training is important in a just society to get our officers to the level to where they can actually implement some of the things that I have mentioned. But that would be my vision of a just society from a policing aspect.
Well, thank you to all three of you. It sounds like we're in a lot of agreement about where we ought to get to in terms of human dignity and heaven, and making sure that folks are respected no matter where they come from, right? And that our systems, as well as the people who are in them, should be behaving that way. So I'm really grateful to be starting from that spot, and I'm curious. So, Chief, you brought up the question about training and sort of both the individual behavior as well as the behavior of the system that an organization is in. I would love for us to talk a little bit. We're in the position we're in because there have been challenges with police departments and a lot of calls for change recently. And so I'm wondering if we could spend a little bit of time talking about what kinds of changes are afoot or could be afoot that would actually address some of the things that you brought up, both from your perspective as an officer, and I would love to also hear from Dr. Stewart and Pastor Gholston about what's, and I think just to prelude a little bit, part of what I'm hoping to get into is a little bit of the conversation. There are all kinds of different calls for change out there right now, right? So we're talking about reform, we're talking about defunding, we're talking about abolishing. And I'd love for us to unpack those things. And I think, Chief, you've opened the door to talk a little bit about what reform might mean, and then also curious about people's perspectives on whether those other words mean the same thing and what we're talking about, if we're all pointed the same direction.
Mm-hmm. So are you pitching that back to me?
Yeah, if you would just start.
So,
start it, because you opened the door to this conversation about training and support,
right.
and that sort of leads for me into this reform conversation about what might be different, right?
Right. So I think when you look at training, historical training of police officers in America as it stands today, and I can't speak for every agency, but I can tell you that the bulk of the agencies, a large number of the agencies throughout our country, still disproportionately recruit more military applicants. And their academies are military style academies that largely focus on tactical force, that type of mindset. And I think we have to get away from that. I think we have to get to what is policing really about. When you look at the movies and you look at police shows, you see police officers that blow up the bad guy, shoot the bad guy, beat the bad guy, and sometimes multiple times in the same episode. That's not what policing is about. That's what will get you fired or in jail. The real job requires respect, compassion. It requires empathy. And I think that we have to change our training tactics to where we start to employ more of that type of what you're really going to be doing 99% of the time when you're on the street interacting with our communities. It's something that we have adjusted in our academy. And we've been lucky to have leadership here in the District of Columbia under Chief Ramsey, Chief Lanier, now Chief Newsham, that have been very progressive in terms of being able to see that we want to change the mindset of our officers. And the way you do that is, number one, what type of officers you're recruiting, where they are coming from, their level of education. There are studies that show that officers with some portion of a college education gives them better skills to be able to problem solve, better skills to be able to be creative, better skills to be able to communicate with the community that they serve. So we have to change our recruiting tactics. We have to change those training tactics to be realistic of what we expect our officers to do and how we expect them to interact with our communities. And I'm talking about things like taking your officers to be more culturally conditioned. We take our officers to the African American Museum, not because it's a new museum, but so that they can see how law enforcement played a detrimental role in racism in America, and how we don't want you to go out and to take on any of those characteristics or tactics as you serve our community. We do implicit bias training, where we talk about those biases and how to try to address those biases that you may not even know that you have before you go out and serve our community. And like I said, none of us are perfect. I said that earlier. We have officers that, yeah, we have to discipline. We have some officers that we have to terminate. But I think these are steps in the right direction to try to get towards that just community that you all are talking about. And de-escalation training is something that we have been doing here for years. You see other departments that are going through this reform now, and we're all going through it. Don't get me wrong. We have changes that are being done here on our department as well. But you hear a lot of departments that are announcing things that they should have done 20 years ago, 15 years ago, in my opinion. And I think the state of law enforcement in the relationships with the community would be in a different place.
Dr. Fisher-Stewart, you've done training for police officers, right? And you've got some curriculum. Talk to us about this.
Well, a couple of things, and I have to say, Chief Greene, you're a breath of fresh air, because those words you spoke would not have come out of any police official's mouth 20 years ago.
Yep.
Right? So there is a change, and having been in charge of the training academy with the MPD before I retired, and also training officers in the interim of the 30 years, and also training them now with this curriculum, a curriculum that I might add that Chief Newsham has, because I sent it to him. It says that we have to train officers differently, that we have to really let them know what the true purpose of policing is, and then ask them whether or not their personal values support what policing is or contradicts, conflicts. And if their personal values uphold the true nature of policing, then they should not be police officers. But if they have some problem with the true nature of policing, which is policing in this country is the enforcement arm of a racist society. Every society needs an enforcement arm. This country is racist. Racism is baked into the DNA of this country. The police agency is that enforcement arm. And this is the other part that is important when we train differently. The majority of officers who come onto the department want to do good. They want to do good. Now, do we have racist police officers in policing? Yes, because we draw from a racist society, and we have yet to find a recruitment tool or a selection tool that can select them out. And so we have racist police officers in policing, just like we have racists sitting in our pews and preaching from our pulpits.
Yes.
Come from a racist society, so it's going to be there. But the thing we have to understand as we want police officers to understand, to be able to critique policing and their role in it, is that because of a racist society, police officers are as much a victim of this racist society as those who lie dead in our streets. And that's what we don't talk about. And we need to talk about, because what happens when officers feel put upon, as we know with New York City, their NYPD, their union has come out in support of Trump. And you have to ask, how do you do that? Well, when only one person is lifting up the police and they're feeling put upon, they will go to that person or that group. And so we have to be able to have training that lets police officers know who come on to do a decent job that the role of policing in this society was created and continues to be to control Black and brown people, to surveil, contain, stop, up to and through the state-sanctioned use of death. And once we put that out, and people can assent to it, not agree, but they're open to let that marinate for a little while, to sit with it, then perhaps we can deconstruct policing and come up with some ideas to actually change it. Because in this issue of reform, We've been reforming policing since the 1930s.
Mm-hmm.
Policing was racist and it was corrupt. So August Vollmer, right?
Mm-hmm.
O.W. Wilson, we're going to professionalize policing. They professionalized, but they didn't know anything about the racism. And so all of these reforms we hear about, we've been doing that since the 1930s because we don't want to deal with the messiness in between. There's a problem with the police. Let's do these reforms. We need to stay with the messiness that says, no, the police departments in this country are the most efficient and effective governmental agencies we have because they do exactly what they were created to do, which is to control and contain Black bodies, brown bodies, immigrant bodies, anybody other than white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men. And once we accept that, then we can do something. We put strategies in place that, number one, will support police officers who want to do the right thing and get rid of police officers who don't, because it's not about rotten apples. The whole dang barrel is rotten because it was created to be rotten. And once we can get that out and talk about that, then some of the things that you were talking about will stick. Because right now we're throwing stuff up against the wall and it ain't sticking. Because we're not solving, we're not putting forth solutions to help with the right problem. We want to go from here it is to solutions without dealing with the mess in the middle. And that's what the training that we've been doing is to give the police and also give the community the words to have the proper conversations, to go into police departments, to go to their mayors, to go to their council members, to go to their churches and say, no, this is what policing is all about. And until we change this, it doesn't matter what you do, it is not going to stick.
Reverend Gholston, we know that you've been, of course, very deeply involved in the community and the work. Most notably as well, too, you've been involved with the DC Peace Walks and hearing and seeing so much going on, as well as you were very instrumental in drafting a letter that others were really responding to and speaking about reform and the changes that we really need to see within our community. Can you talk a little bit about that letter, as well as what you are seeing and hearing that needs to change, or what you're hearing about that?
Sure, yeah. First thing I can say is Peace Walks DC is a coalition of churches, survivors of gun violence, and community organizers that exist to end both state and intracommunity violence in our city. So we are all survivors of gun violence in one way or another, and we are all survivors of state violence in one way or another. It's impossible to be a person of color, a Black man in the District of Columbia, and to not experience both state violence and intercommunity violence. My own nephew just 2 years ago was nearly killed. He was shot 6 times uptown off of Upshur Street, Georgia and Upshur Street, which is what really just launched me into the work, not just against state violence, but also against intercommunity violence. And so that's what Peace Walks does. We do neighborhood walks where we do 2 things: love and connect with our neighbors, to try to connect our neighbors to resources. We partner with the Department of Employment Services. We partner with Department of Behavioral Health. We partner with the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. And we partner with over 50 churches that are in our coalition, and a host of nonprofit organizations, just to be boots on the ground, connecting with our neighbors, because we don't believe that policing is the way out of gun violence. DC has seen an increase in the policing budget every year for the last, 12 years, and we've also seen a precipitous rise in homicides in the last 12 years. So if more money in the police budget was the answer to reducing violence in our community, particularly gun violence, then we wouldn't have gun violence. And so it comes really out of a deep love and respect and appreciation for the human beings who serve as police officers, but also as a deep love and respect for the human beings who are the survivors of gun violence. I think in each group you have people who are survivors of trauma. Police officers who, though they wear a badge and though they wear a uniform, are also processing years on the job trauma. And as Chief Greene stated, if you want those contacts to be positive between the community and the police officer, that trauma has to be dealt with and has to be acknowledged. Mm-hmm. What I would say is, you asked me to speak a little bit about the letter. The letter is a letter that is called "The Time Is Now," and it's a document that was endorsed and signed by over 550 congregations and faith leaders in the city, all across the city from every ward. And we simply said in that letter that reform is not the answer to the issues that we see in our community. We've been tinkering around, as Dr. Fisher-Stewart just said, we've been tinkering around the edges of a fundamentally unjust policing system in this country since its very beginning. At the very root of what it is to be a police officer in this country, police officers were the government arm of the Fugitive Slave Act. They were the state-sanctioned individuals that were authorized by the state to hunt, arrest, and return Black bodies to enslavement. That is the reason why we have a police department in a city like Washington, D.C., which both D.C. and Alexandria, we know, were enormous hubs in the trafficking and sale and the commodification of Black bodies. Police officers were the ones that were used to meet violence on our bodies. It's just as simple as that. And so if we're going to see, the idea of reform is something that is antiquated. And reform is not going to get us where we need to get. So our proposal was to take in this last budget cycle. We will keep fighting because the council could not find the conscience to support our proposal. Our proposal is a 20% reinvestment of the police budget in the Department of Employment Services, in the Department of Behavioral Health, in credible messenger programs, in the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, in the Cure Violence program in the Office of the Attorney General, and in faith-rooted and faith-based responses to ending gun violence. We saw one of the main reasons why in the 90s and in early 2000s we began to see the numbers go down as it relates to homicides is because the faith community came together under the leadership of people like Reverend Don Isaac, Reverend Anthony Motley, Reverend Tony Lee, many members of the faith community, and they got out in the streets and they got to know both shooters and survivors. They got in their face, and got to, in a loving way, and said, "This is our community." In the Black Lives Matter movement, we like to say, "Whose streets? Our streets." Well, in the 90s, right, a lot of your clergy weren't interested in just being on a panel, weren't interested in just being on a commission, or I sit now on the Reform Commission that Chairman Mendelson just established. Right. And so I feel some type of way actually about being on it because, I feel like that's one of the ways that they try to get pastors and preachers to stop their activism and to stop the work. Right. So they love to bring preachers in for a press conference to pray for the meal at the mayor's function or whatever you want to call it. Get an invitation to the Christmas party. But what pastors need to be doing is to be out in our community, living in our community, and serving our community by directly doing the work of healing of both shooters and survivors of gun violence and of police violence in our communities. And so we call for 20% reinvestment of the over $530 million budget that the MPD currently has And we had to take an honest look and have an honest examination of the fact that the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, which is what the mayor said she wanted to use to deal with this issue of crime, it was established with less than a $1 million budget. Let me say it again. In a city where $500 million is given to policing, not even $1 million went into the establishment of the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, based on a model in Oakland, California, again, where clergy, credible messengers, returning citizens did the hard work of reducing crime and reducing violence in our communities through engagement, which is something that, sadly, I appreciate Chief Lamar, but sadly, our officers have forgotten the art of engagement. It is an art. It is an art to be able to engage, truly do deep engagement, the deep work of engagement in our community. When I was growing up in the city, we all native Washingtonians. When we were growing up, at least when I'll speak for myself. When I was growing up, you had an officer-friendly program. You had side-by-side band. They used to come to the school and do the go-go concerts in the school, right? I had positive interactions with Black cops until I stopped being a cute kid and turned 18 and ended up on their, on their suspect list. I'm getting, the moment I can drive, all of a sudden I'm getting pulled up. Whoop whoop! You got a air freshener in your car. That's obstructing your view, sir. I got a what? This little stupid stuff. I'm getting pulled over. Black cops, white cops. It don't matter. It don't matter where I got my Sunday hat. That's why I started dressing up for forums and stuff like that. That's why I start putting my collar on, because it don't make a difference. When you're out and you're Black, it's enough of a reason to be harassed and to be surveilled and to be treated without dignity in this city, and it's a shame. And so we know what works. We know what has been research tested. In cities like Oakland, in cities like Chicago, in cities like DC. And so, it's just too much money. $500 million going toward an agency that's still going to be trained by an occupying force in Israel. And we want to talk about implicit bias training. No, I've done the trainings with police recruits in LA. You can train until you're blue in the face, but unless you have a field training officer that actually gets it, then every rookie who is in a George Floyd type situation is going to continue to rely on that senior officer, on that veteran officer. What we observed in Minneapolis is classic case of, you can train somebody in their duty to intervene until they're blue in the face, but it's, at the end of the day, it's the officer that they serve with on the job that matters most. So it's not about the brass. And I always love engaging with, good brothers and sisters who are top brass of, different, agencies, different policing agencies. They talk good, they make you feel all warm and fuzzy, like everything is good. But at the end of the day, it's the officers that are rank and file officers on the ground who are wreaking havoc in our communities, who have people in our communities afraid of either getting shot by the police or being shot by other young folks who are also experiencing trauma of being over-policed. So if we're going to see real change in our communities, we've got to invest in peace and stop investing in instruments and tools of war.
Mm-hmm. Y'all want to talk about that for a second? Pastor Gholston, you put a lot of stuff on the table there, right? Everything from community engagement, from congregations, faith communities, to shifting the ways that officers on the streets engage with folks who are on the streets themselves, and thinking about how our resources are allocated. So I'm curious, Dr. Fisher-Stewart, Chief Greene, y'all, it seems like some stuff to talk about here, yeah?
I mean, there's a lot to unpack with what Pastor Delonte said, but it goes back to the basic understanding of this country that Blackness is criminalized. Blackness is criminalized, and that's why you stop a Black person who has, air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror, but you don't see it with a white guy who's driving down the street. And the fact that once Black police officers take off their uniforms, they're just Black. And they can be stopped they can be surveilled, they can be roughed up just like any other Black person. So until we are able to discuss that and say that is what's happening, that Black bodies have been and continue to be criminalized. And so if you're Black, it's prima facie evidence that you have done something wrong. That's why we're going to stop you. And then the culture of the police department, there is no way that that officer in Minneapolis could murder George Floyd in the manner that he did, not caring at all if he knew that anybody gave a damn about George Floyd, that anybody would hold him accountable. If you think you're going to be held accountable, you're not going to do that. You know that you are being filmed, but you don't care because you don't think you will be held accountable because Black lives don't matter in this country. We just had a couple of city officials arrested today for damaging a statue, right? But we still haven't locked up the officers who killed Breonna Taylor. So that statue that was pulled down is worth more than the life of a Black person. And those are the conversations that we have to have in the community and with the police to ask, why is that? Why is that? Why is it you'll go to jail for pulling down a statue, but you won't go to jail for murdering someone Black? And until we answer those questions and answer them honestly, we're going to be sitting here again 15 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, trying to figure out how to reform the police. And so the faith community has to, and it's more than just the pastors. It's more than just the pastors.
You're not going to let me off the hook,
Let me
Gayle.
say that again. It is more than just the pastors. It is more than just the pastors. The pastors go out there, we look behind us like, where is everybody? It has to become a priority for the faith community to make this change, to work together with the police and the community. It has to become a priority because, for example, in the Episcopal Church, we talk about racial reconciliation, and I keep asking, is that a priority? Because if it's a priority, then the money will be put behind whatever we need to get it done. If eliminating racism in policing is a priority, then that money will be shifted to those programs that will help the police do it. If we're going to change our attitudes and do the things that Pastor Delonte said, then yeah, we're going to reallocate money from the police department, but it has to be reallocated in a way that we make sure that whoever's getting the money is geared up and ready to go and do what needs to be done. One, on a 24/7 basis, because the community wants it on a 24/7 basis, and that we actually take whatever those functions are that we have done the analysis in the police department to remove those functions, because you can't take the money and still have the police still doing that. You can't do that. And so we're going to have to work together. We have to come, because it's still an us versus we mentality out there. It is still this militarization that even King talked about the country, but it's in policing. We have to ask, why do we need all this military stuff? It looks like you're going to battle, even in the picture that you showed, the graphic that you showed. That doesn't look like community policing to me. That looks like you're going to war against citizens. And my grandmama, and I know our grandmas they taught you the way you dress is the way you act. So you had play clothes, you had school clothes, you had dress clothes, and you had church clothes. And so when you dress like you're going to battle, guess what? You're going to go to battle. And the question that we also have to ask is that when you have people on the street who are demonstrating, not rioting, demonstrating for equality, on which side do you find the police? And what are they protecting?
Chief Greene,
do you find the police and what are they protecting?
I'm grateful for that. We want to bring you in because,
Yeah, I tried to jump in between that. I didn't make it.
No, certainly, and we appreciate as you can respond to these because we've heard about the training and the other pieces. Please give us some insight about what you see going on and the changes that you're working on.
I can tell you. Let me say this: that the young man, the Reverend spoke about the partnerships being out actually on the ground floor in the communities, trying to affect change in some of the issues that we're having in our communities. And you mentioned Reverend Motley. I've been out there walking with Reverend Motley, dealing with issues we were having back at the 5th District at one time. Bishop Kelsey, Reverend Kearney. I mean, I've been out there in the communities with some of the faith-based organizations personally. And I think that we need more of that. I think that we have East of the River clergy and some organizations that we deal with here in the District of Columbia. But I think that's another route to try to get to some of the issues that are causing violence and some of the other more minor, mundane things that are going on in the communities where the police may not have to be so involved in certain things. And she had a good point. We hear a lot of talk about defunding police department budgets. My question is, what's in place? I don't say I oppose every conversation about shifting some of the non-police related things that police have had to take on over the years, shifting those into the agencies and pots where they belong, having more mental health professionals working, as Dr. Gayle said, around the clock, so that when you get called for that mental health person that's in crisis, it isn't always a police officer that's responding to that because everybody else is at home. That you have a more robust hiring program where some of these subjects that have kind of fallen out of the traditional realm of employable people have some places where they can get jobs. But defunding in a lot of aspects means less police officers and less police officers immediately, okay? If we don't have anything in place, then we need to have something in place before you take the stableness out of the communities where violence is really impacting those communities. I've been privy to arguments from both sides from some of the people that I just mentioned that will tell you they don't want less police officers in their communities. Do they want police officers to be pulled out of some of the roles that they've been forced into, and simply because of some of the things that you talked about, Dr. Gayle? Yeah, I would love to see officers not going to those things that they're truly not mental health officials. They don't have the training that we get we're not doctors. Having the professionals go out and deal with those types of situations. You know, we get called to schools to deal with children that are acting up. Why isn't there another entity that deals with that instead of the law enforcement? And if nothing's in place, before we start saying we're just going to automatically reduce the size of different departments, let's get something in place so we can do that safely.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments there because for 2 years I organized table talk conversations between police officers, unhoused individuals, activists, DAs, and we gathered in downtown LA, we gathered in East LA and Boyle Heights in the more Latinx community, we gathered in Inglewood, in South Central LA, and we did the work both in the community, but then we would also bring the community together with rank and file officers to have important conversations around mental health, around homelessness, around racial justice, around problem solving around these issues. And what we would do is we would sort of do crowdsourced conversations. We would invite students from USC and UCLA to sort of do ethnography on the conversations and code the conversations. We would then take those conversations and present them to the chair of the council, the mayor in LA, as a part of a community platform for change in policing. And part of those conversations is what led to a civilian oversight board to be established over the sheriffs in LA that has subpoena power. That is actually 9 folks that are from the community, no cops on the board, people who are from the community who are advocates and have the power to. Now, the sheriffs still fight, just like people fight congressional subpoenas. The sheriffs still fight, the board's subpoena authority and all those sorts of things. But I bring all those things up because I spent some time really listening to officers and the community. We together, along with the organizers of what we call then Trust Talks, we really tried to listen as closely as we could to both rank and file officers, but also to some up top brass officers as well. And what we heard time and time again was what Chief Greene just said, which is, I actually don't want to be having to respond to every unhoused individual call. Or actually, I'd prefer not to have to go into a school and contribute to the school to prison pipeline. Honestly, I really would rather not have to deal with every single person who's having a mental health emergency every single time. And what we saw both in LA and in the city of Pasadena, where I was living at the time, they had what they called Hope Teams in Pasadena, but the so-called Hope Team was a very small unit that only operated on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9 to 5, right? So you can only have hope. You can only have hope from Tuesdays and Thursdays 9 to 5. If you find yourself in a hopeless situation on Thursday evening at 6:30, and that's what happened. We had a situation where a brother named J.R. Thomas, he was having a mental health episode in October of 2017. He called because he said in the call to the dispatcher, "I'm having an episode." His family knew, the community knew, and if the officers were about their business, they would have also known, hey, this is that brother. From time to time, he has issues. But instead, they sent 8 officers into his home. They beat this man to death. They tased this man to death. He deceased. He was murdered because we refused to make the key and core and significant investments that we must make outside of policing. And so I agree that there must be key investments that are made, and there have to be stopgaps in the interim. And we got to be serious about training members of the community, training the mental health community, training the social work community, training the clergy community, training the lay community to be able to really stand in the gap and intercede. Because if we don't, then our calls fall on deaf ears. And so that is an area of intersection and of agreement that we have to have something that's working. But my point is that when we presented, Kenyon McDuffie and others, when they presented the legislation, research tested, said this is what it will take, then why didn't we invest in that? If we're going to establish a cure team in the Office of the Attorney General, they were given $300,000. Okay, Carl Racine had to go begging to Washington Gas to even get funding for a model that we have seen work, right? So at the end of the day, it's about a lack of will and a lack of leadership. It's about lazy leadership that would rather just continue to rely primarily on state-sponsored oppression rather than invest in peace and in liberation. And you can talk nice about it. You can dress it up. You can do all kinds of things to it. But at the end of the day, it is still state-sponsored oppression in our communities unless we invest in the alternatives that we must invest in.
So I got one more question, and then I'm going to look to Leonard to pull in the first of our audience questions there. So that's why he and I are looking at our phones, just because we're getting those questions. But so Pastor Gholston, you talked about the sort of the reasons that we're not investing, if there's agreement here around what it would take, what we need to invest in order to make communities safer and to rely less on policing. So what is it? And so Reverend Fisher-Stewart, you've mentioned, you mentioned at the very beginning, you want this to lead to some action, right? So what do folks who are listening to this need to be doing if we're hearing and aligning with some of the things that all three of you are saying about what agreement could look like that communities want, that we've heard police officers talk about, that is based on research? What can community members who are listening to this be doing in order to help move that forward if we're aligned? Any one of the three of you, from your perspective, what would we to be doing? And then Leonard, you get to jump in with some audience questions, because I got too many of my own. I got to back up after that one.
One thing that has to happen, and coming back to Reverend Gholston, is that we have to recognize, and this goes back to racism, and this is what Chief Greene said. A lot of times we don't want to do anything because there are white, black, and brown people who also want to see black people locked up. Okay, so you have some racial self-oppression. And so until we are able to let the genie out of the bottle and talk about all of that, we're not going to be able to put in place the plans that need to be put in place. There are folks who think black people belong in jail. And so whatever the police do is fine with them. And so until we can have those conversations and really get down on the ground and wear sweat clothes, don't come to these trainings dressed all nice, because we're going to have to get down and dirty and pull back the sore that we keep putting bandages on as opposed to cleaning out that infection. We're not going to be able to do what we need to do. And then to work with police, the police department, along with the community, to say, no, this is the role of policing in American society. But before we can change it, you have to accept it, that it is to surveil, control black and brown bodies and get them out of white space. Once we do that, then we can kind of figure out what the police department doesn't need to be doing and shift those funds. But we need to tell the truth and make the devil a liar, because the devil, the details are in there. The devil is in the details that we don't want to talk about. We don't want to talk about that, but we're going to have to. And if people's feelings get hurt, they're just going to have to get hurt. Because until we are able to have those frank conversations about race and the results of racism in this country on everybody, we have violence. We got, everybody wants to say, okay, well, if we're going to do, why do we have black on black violence? Well, black people have been taught that black people don't matter either. And that if you get in my way, I'm going to take you out. So until we can have those conversations, we're going to see black violence against black bodies, because they've been taught that black bodies don't matter. And if you get in the way of the shoes I want, I will get rid of you. I'm not loved. I don't love you. You're just an obstacle in my way to something society says I need to have. And so those are the conversations perhaps the faith community needs to pull people together so that we can start having those devil in the details conversations that will make a difference.
That's Stewart. I know you're involved in quite a bit of conversations, and hopefully tonight is helping as well for us to have these conversations. We have so many questions that are coming in. And I can't believe that the time has gone by so quickly already when I look down, because I was listening to all three of you. It just shows how much we need this moment to have these conversations and to draw others in. I'd like to pose one of the questions broadly that has come in to say, and to ask the question. And I'd like to ask Chief Greene to begin with responding to this, and then hear it from, of course, Dr. Stewart and Pastor Gholston. How do we really go about building trust between the department, whether it be the church or individuals? How do we take steps, or what would you say, where do we begin to build trust? Because we're not going anywhere without trusting one another. And there is a level of distrust, we know, that exists in our communities and between some in the department as well. So how do we go about doing that? What are the practical things right now? Chief, can you answer that? Please go.
I think in law enforcement, one of the things we have not seen over the generations is transparency. I think that some departments are much better than others, but I think transparency, and I mean transparency with everything, the training, transparency with uses of force. Police departments across the nation need to outfit their officers with body-worn camera so that when we do have critical incidents, there is something to offer to the public to see what exactly happened. I think getting the community involved, and that's whether you have citizens advisory councils, whether you have ANC commissioners, neighborhood advisory commissioners, getting involved in what is going on, not only with the police departments, with legislation, with the entire justice system. We have a program in the district where we have a citizens academy where we actually take people through a very condensed version of the academy just so that they know what we do in their neighborhoods. They realize what these police officers are out here getting involved in, why police officers do certain things. And those are all just baby steps, but it all leads to transparency, and it all brings it back to more trust and more partnership. And the other thing, just like the gentleman was talking about, walking in the communities and working with officers on the ground floor, we need to do that more as well, because that builds trust in the community. One thing he mentioned that I want to talk about, because I'm personally involved in this, I grew up in the District of Columbia, as I stated earlier, and I grew up in school with my first interactions with the police department in elementary school through the Officer Friendly program, through the side-by-side band, the very things that he talked about. I brought that program back about 3 years ago, and we got that back into the school system. It's even more robust now, where it's got bullying and different things like that built into that program. Because what we saw in the District of Columbia was two things that our community members talk about in their 50s. That was their first job that they got from Mayor Berry, and they talk about the side-by-side band and the officer-friendly program that used to come through their schools, and they had those interactions with police officers that were positive. And those were some of their first interactions with police officers. So we got that program back up off the ground, and it's been running now for what, 3 years? About 3 years in our school system. And hopefully it will be running when I'm long gone. And hopefully the Reverend will be talking about his kids going through and seeing the side-by-side band and making those relationships with police officers. But transparency and relationships, the community partnerships that we build are paramount in these communities for regaining the trust from the community.
Please respond. Yes.
I'll be brief. What I would say around trust, what it takes to build trust is, and to piggyback on the Chief's comment around transparency, I would say that everybody needs to be focusing on March. March is when NPD has their oversight hearings. If you really care about transparency, you need to be looking at the council's website now, looking at the agenda now for March. Every March is when they have their oversight hearings. It'll be your chance to ask, why wasn't the family of Jeffrey Price, for example, notified before the video of their son's murder was put out 2 weeks ago. They didn't even get a phone call. Okay, their son, one of my good friends' nephews, was killed because MPD decided to chase him on a dirt bike, which is illegal in the District of Columbia. Police officer did not stop at a stop sign and pulled out in front of Jeffrey Price, leading to his death. The family advocated for that video footage would be released. They did not even get so much as an email, a text, or a phone call. As a matter of fact, they found out on the news that the video footage of Jeffrey's murder, death, they still call to this day, they still call it an accident. Even though the police officer pulled out in front of a dirt bike, did not stop at a stop sign, it is still listed as an accident. So if you want to talk about transparency and oversight and all that, show up in March, start getting ready now to come to the oversight hearings in March, start getting ready now to show up to your budget hearings in October. If you're serious about accountability in the District of Columbia, show up for oversight of the one's office as well, show up for oversight of the Office of the Attorney General, show up for oversight of the Department of Behavioral Health, show up for oversight of the Department of Employment Services, because if we're going to be referring folks to these programs, guess what? They got to work. If we're going to send folks to try to get jobs, if we're going to send folks to try to get a foot in the door, these programs, they have to work. So that would be what I would implore folks to do. Get familiar with the schedule and organize. You can certainly follow us on Instagram at Peace Walks DC. A lot of y'all are involved with Moms Demand Action, another great organization. Get involved. Dr. Fisher-Stewart, sign up for one of her trainings. If you're looking for a next step, these are the type of next steps. We need folks doing peace walks in Ward 3, in Ward 4. We already have a team in Ward 4 and in Ward 1 that has just got started. We're in Ward 7 and Ward 8 right now looking to expand. So if you live in any of these wards, we want to see you. Follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook, get engaged.
Mm-hmm. So I have a son. He's a Black son. And I'm frightened for his life. I know I have met Chief Lamar Green. I know other police officers. I'm a chaplain with Tacoma Park Police. For some reason, they gave me 3 badges, and I am never without my 3 badges in case I am stopped. In case I am stopped. And so we're going to do what Pastor Gholston says, and we're going to do with what Chief Greene says, but we still need to come together where we can ask police officers, Black and white police officers, Asian police officers, what do you see when you see a Black man walking down the street? What do you see when you see a Black man driving a car? And to that Black man who's walking or driving, what do you see when you see a police officer pull up behind you? Because that's how we're going to establish trust, because that's where the distrust is. Because police officers are our spouses, our uncles, our aunts, our cousins, our sons and daughters. However, when we're out on the street, they just become blue. And so until we can pull together people and say, what is it you see when you see a Black man just walking down the street? Why do you pull up on 3 Black men standing on the corner? What is it that they are doing that causes you to pull up on them? Until we can have those conversations in brave space, still we're putting bandages on the wound. We're going to have to establish trust by getting in proximity to each other, knowing each other better, and being able to ask difficult questions that have come up through the ages that color how policing is done in this country. That takes brave space, that takes money, that takes resources, but it needs to be done if we're going to be able to do anything that Pastor Gholston and Chief Greene say needs to be done.
I want to thank you, Dr. Gayle Fisher-Stewart. I want to follow up on that with one more question. I think that we'll do some rounds with, and And a number of other folks have asked us for examples of what's working. And we've had some of that already. So folks, all three of you, I think, have shared about things that are in process that are working or things that you'd suggest. So I want to go a little bit deeper on that. And I'm wondering if there are examples of places where those kinds of conversations are happening, right? So Pastor Gholston, I know you talked about the conversations you all had in LA. Is that something that we can look to learn about what it might be like for other cities to take on that kind of conversation that's cross-community conversation? Are there cities or programs that you all know of for folks who want to learn about what's working and how they got there? Other cities that are doing more partnerships across social workers or mental health workers or homeless outreach advocates. Where can folks look to? Because it's helpful. We know what we don't want, right? We don't want this world that we're living in right now. We don't want the pain and the trauma that we're all living with. So what are we going to look to help guide us a little further down the path, right? Where's a light shining that we can look at?
You ask what's working. Things are in the works.
Great. Who should be watching? Who's got stuff in the works? Great.
We haven't got to the goal yet, but things are in the works. And if you want to look at a department that has made the attempt to change the culture, it's not perfect. But an example would be Canon, New Jersey, that fired everybody, brought everybody back, changed the value system. Not saying it's perfect, but it was at least somebody said, I'm going to take a risk and try this and see what happens. But what people need to do is look at home first. Look at your own department, your own community, and ask some questions about what's going on. What is the training about? Let me see these stats. Who do you hire? How do you hire? Why do you have that tank? What do you use that tank for? But start close to home, because just because it works in Minneapolis doesn't mean it's going to work in your particular situation. But you can look, because I would like somebody to tell me how much money has been spent studying police departments since the 1970s, studying and reforming police. We could fund every single one of Reverend Delonte's programs over and over again. So how much money has been spent? To what result? What result? Mm-hmm.
Chief Greene, who are you all studying? What are you looking at that's working? Welcome back, Pastor Gholston.
We go through a variety of different studies. I know Georgetown Lab is doing a lot of work with our police department on our stop data, trying to look at that data and figure out what should be the right balance for different components of that data. There were studies done on our use of force, the reductions in the use of force that we've had in the districts of Columbia over the years. We routinely go around to other departments, look at different things that they're doing to try to get best practices in different areas. So it happens. We have a body, the Police Chiefs Association, Major City Chiefs, who is tied in with a police research forum called PERF, which studies departments all over the country and some outside of the country to look at best practices and to pass that down to other departments that are here in the nation. Doesn't mean all of the agencies take the advice that they're given. I know that we have made several changes to our use of force policies over the years, our chase policies, different things as a result of the information that we get from those forums. So I say that to say that the intellectual studies are being done to see what the best practices are. And it's up to your agency to take on those lessons learned. Maybe there should be a national model policy of where these departments are and what their use of force policies are and what their use of force review policies are. I can certainly tell you that we're not perfect, but I can tell you that if most of the departments in this nation had the review process and the things and the policies in place that we have, I just don't think we would be seeing a lot of the situations that we're in.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
In the midst of this moment, we know that there's still a lot of work to be done. And let me say again, I'm grateful for our three panelists being able to dive deeply into some of these subjects and talk about where we are and where we're going. The relationship, as we know, between the church and communities of faith and whether the police department could be better. Now, I'd like to know, Chief, we have all of these chaplains, and we know that Dr. Stewart serves as a police chaplain, and you know, we have all of these corps. Is there a real role or expectation for them to help connect with the community, and how do we build this relationship even better than what it is right now?
Well, we would love, absolutely love to increase our partnership with the faith-based community. As I stated before, we worked with East of the River clergy. We worked with various churches and religious organizations within our 7 police districts. That's how I know Motley and Kelsey and some of the people that I mentioned. And put the offer out there. She's clergy for Tacoma Park. So I know she has contact with our police clergy as well. Put the offer out there. We'll partner with you and do some of the things that we were talking about earlier, getting out on the ground where we're having these issues in our communities, and see if you can help us to find a better way or help us to be more effective in remedying some of these problems. And it doesn't have to be, we don't have to start with the most violent issues that are going on in the community. There are other things where the faith-based community can come in to play. Right now in the District of Columbia and in the Metropolitan area, we're having these social gatherings during the COVID-19 pandemic. But even bigger than that, these social gatherings that are really just illegal block parties have been going on in our communities for quite a while now. Just something like that to help us bridge that gap, figure out how to solve that type of problem where we're not particularly getting into the violent things that we're plagued with in our communities, but starting with something like that where we can work together to find a solution. So we welcome any support you can give. You got my number now, so let me know.
All right, friends, we do have your number, Chief Greene.
Yes.
It is 9 o'clock, or about 60 seconds until 9. So I'm going to thank our panelists, the Reverend Dr. Gayle Fisher-Stewart, Patrol Chief Lamar Green, Pastor Delonte Gholston, who I think is still with us and not on video. We're so grateful to all 3 of you for your the work that you do in the world, truly, and for your presence here with us tonight and what you shared with us. I want to remind folks that if you'd like to join us on Thursday, we have a follow-up conversation with former mayors Betsy Hodges from Minneapolis, Sharon Pratt from here in DC, Rushern Baker, a former county executive from Prince George's County, as well as Frederick Davey, who serves, he works at Union Theological Seminary in New York City and chairs a civilian oversight board for the Police Department of New York. So we're going to have some conversation on Thursday with those folks about the city governance perspective of change making around police and how that might happen. I also, before we lose too many people, want to thank everyone who is in attendance here for being with us tonight. We're so sorry we couldn't get it up on Facebook. So this program will be posted on our YouTube channel, and I think we'll also can link it back to our Facebook account so folks can watch it there. And for those who are able to support your own faith communities and nonprofit institutions in this time, I hope that you're doing that. This is a rough time for a lot of organizations doing a lot of good work. And so we hope that you are sharing what resources you might have available to you with those organizations. If you're able to help support the Cathedral in our availability to host programs like this and keep our building standing so that our doors can open one day soon. We hope that you would be generous with us. There's a link in the chat if you would be open to doing that. So panelists, if you want to stick around and do a little bit of debrief after all of our participants leave, you're more than welcome to. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Canon Hamlin for a prayer, and then we're all going to go dark, and we're going to go on with the rest of our evenings. So, Canon Hamlin, your turn. I think I got everything.
Thank you. Certainly, joining with our programs director, again, thank you to our panelists on this evening, and I can't say enough thank yous for helping us to set the tone for this evening and the days ahead, as well as Thursday evening. So those that are inclined to join me and all who are online with us, won't you join me in a closing word of prayer? Almighty, once again, as we prepare to leave this moment, may we be ever mindful that we never leave your presence. May we not just be caught up with our self-concern, that we forget our concern for our neighbor. We now ask that we would have further conversations, and that through this moment, once again, we might be able to see what we have not seen, hear what we have not heard, so that we can do what we have not done. So take us from this moment that will lead to other moments, in order that we would be able to see tomorrow and the days to come as brighter days. So may the Lord bless you and keep you, his face shine upon you, and be gracious unto you. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Amen. Thanks, everybody.